Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel, welcome to the final video of the series that I've put out in December. The Act 5 guide is this video here, and this finishes from the start point. We did several videos ago with the beginner guide taking you from the start point. Now this is the end point before we then go into other things like variants and Road to Labyrinth and Realm of Legends, but that's something that I'll probably cover in January in a new section of guides. But this video will give you different types of tips. We'll look at playing style tips, general video guides to help out champion and synergies, as well as nodes and good counters for those nodes. Also, this will have full walkthroughs of Act 5.1, 5.2, 5.3 and 5.4. And if you want to skip to any of those information, I've put them as a pinned comment down below with time codes, so you'll be able to kind of skip to different sections of the video that actually you want to find guides or information about when it comes to going against the progression point. So let's talk general information and quick tips. First of all, know your ability, and that's important as you progress through, and hopefully you've gone through this guide, you've understood how to increase just very gradually your improvement to how you play, how you build masteries accordingly. Obviously videos that I've done, obviously you've seen in this series. Save units as well depending on your skill level and champions available. Saving units for the purpose of, if you've done all your masteries and you've got it to a point that you're happy with, then it's a case of using those units to help towards buying things like revives and other types of helpful things. Don't go ham, take your time, go back into the content when you feel comfortable, because obviously rushing stuff is not a good answer to further progression in the game. And type of champions like 5s and 6 stars will make anything easier if you have them. If you don't, then likely you'll be taking 4 stars, maybe 5 stars, maybe even 3 stars with good synergies into the different types of Act 5 chapters. And finally, higher ranks of 4 stars and 5 stars will make things easier. That is a given. So those are key bits of information to really home in on. Now when it comes to playing tips, intercept skills are very important, as well as understanding parry, which is 2 things that we've gone over in previous videos. Boosts, especially the 20 to 30% ones, a good balance and help towards a lot of the restrictions that 5.3 has. But look, it's up to you whether or not you want to use boosts in general. It's just a helpful thing to then plow through a lot of content. And there's a lot of general videos to help out, like Dave's intercepting video, which link is in the description. Dave's parrying video, link is in the description. Those are dork lessons tips, by the way. Also ones that we've covered in previous videos. Do bear in mind my unit grind guide, as well as my potion and revive grind guide, which is very important, as well as my champion previews or champion reviews playlist. All very helpful things, and again, link to those are in the description down below. Now, champions. Champions are very important, as well as synergy builds around them. Do bear in mind there's a lot of champions that have synergies that benefit others. Like you've got Nick Fury, like you've got Mr. Fantastic, like you've got Heimdall. There's loads of different champions out there that benefit certain synergy groups. But if you're looking for specific champions, there's a whole host, a massive list of available champions that are going to be helpful to your roster, as well as helpful to getting through a lot of Act 5. Like your Magics, your Dr. Voodoos, your Blades, your Corvus, your Ghosts, your Voids, Rogue, Iceman, Namor, Scarlet Witch, Omega Red, Stark, Spidey, Mr. Sinister, Cull Obsidian, Aegon, Sabretooth, Nick Fury, Archangel, Doctor Doom and Quake, to name but a few. If I was to go into full information about why those champions are so good, it would take a long time to fully explain them. But what I'll do is, as I go through the certain guide points of different types of chapters, hopefully you'll get an idea of what makes them so good, especially against different types of global nodes, as well as tricky nodes that are put in place in Act 5 in general. Now, as you can see, the rewards look pretty darn tasty for 100%ing Act 5. So let's start delving into how to go from start to finish. First of all, and you've got Flare. The champion gains 300% attack, but degens 100% of their max health over 60 seconds. And this is very important because obviously you want to keep alive as much as possible. At points where you're degenning, there are certain champions that interact with degen, and that is Hulk Ragnarok. But as well, limiting down things like the extent of degen is kind of important for those that regen health, and that's why I've put Dr. Voodoo in here, because he's a good champion. it's a case that the champion has a huge amount of regen and can really kind of counterbalance the extent of damage that you're having. Same thing with a lot of any other champions that have regeneration. So these are just some options here. And you could do Mr. Sinister, you know, he's very deep amount of regeneration on that character, which is pretty cool. But as well, when it comes to the boss, I'd say keep it at L1 as much as possible, and Flare does help. This is where things are a little bit more simpler to go up against. So do watch out for, as you see, things like nodes and incoming things. It's kind of important to take those down, but at the same time there will be one up that may be a little bit of a pest. Power control can be quite important as well if you're looking towards like keeping him down to an L1 or keeping the power down on that enemy, then champions like Magic could be applicable. And Dr. Voodoo as well has abilities off of his special 2 to do some sort of power burning type thing. Next up, and we've got Breakthrough coming to town. Now with this back in the day, I think I used an armor break type champion. There's a lot more that there is nowadays than there used to be. You can have a champion like Medusa that does armor break, that increases the extent of or quickness of doing Breakthrough. So the champion starts with plus 5,000 armor rating, but the opponent reduces their armor rating by 200 with each hit. So obviously champions that do multitude of hits will help out to then allow yourself to take off a Breakthrough. And you know, you've got champions like Domino out there, even to a less extent War Machine, which is off of his L1, does an extensive amount of burst damage in a very quick succession. So that is something as well to bear in mind. Champions that do a lot amount of hits in a very short space of time. Now when it comes to the boss, this is important to understand when you're facing a champion that throws projectiles. Do you want to make the situation easy or harder for yourself? And power control obviously stops champions getting to things like their special 1 or even special 2. And by the way, going against Moon Knight, the special 2 is much more easier to avoid. But when it comes to projectile evading, there's going to be several out there. Stealth Suit Spidey, Stark Spidey, Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler's a personal favourite of mine when it comes to evading certain things like projectiles, and especially with this champion throwing special 1s, that could be something to then balance off against this. But this is again the more easier point when it comes to Act Point 5. Next up, and the global, is Flare again. Flare is a fun thing to do, and I do like the fact of throwing special attacks with increased damage. Obviously do bear in mind for those that are quick to get power, then you know you've got Namor, you've got as well Hyperion. If they're quick to gain power, and the fact is that your specials are going to be powerful as well, the fact is you're going to be able to kind of blast through enemies. There are 2 champions I really like, that's Hyperion and Namor, by the way. Also, if you want to power control, which is kind of important against the boss, then yeah, I would probably say that could be a good option for you. But also do bear in mind there are several other options. There's a load of options. Do bear in mind as well that Act 5 has been out for a long time, so new champions being put in would be more effective against this kind of stuff. And when you come against the ever delightful Iron Patriot, you've got to bear in mind a few things as well. And the fact is, off of the SP2, that is when a projectile is going to come towards you. If you're not very good with projectile evading, go into your block. Or it's a case of like, well, not in this sense, because it's unblockable. It would be best to have a projectile evading champion, like the evaders that we just talked about, Nightcrawler, Stark Spidey, Daredevil, etc. But as well, if you want to suppress the power gain, then do bear in mind champions like Magic, like Vision, that are able to power control and limit down the extent of power gain that champion has. And with the L1, it's a beam attack, so it's one complete swipe back. That is it's very important when you face off against him. Next up, and on to Life Transfer. Life Transfer is one of my favorites. It's very fun because at the same time, if you've got class advantage, then you're able to kind of get more when it comes to getting back life. It's kind of like healing, but as soon as you hit into the opponent, you get life back to you. And also do bear in mind that there's Mystic Ward as well, so your nullifying effects are going to fail. But I don't think that should deter you from using certain champions, and I would probably say that one of the best to go up against Venom is going to be a champion called Morningstar. Morningstar is a very good champion for interacting with throwing a beam attack off of an SP2. And one thing I like to do with Morningstar, and especially going up against a boss that gets buffs, and Morningstar punishes buffs, is to first of all start off by doing a parry, then hitting a heavy attack. and then keeping the boss at the L1 and then hitting on through with that SP2, doing a devastating amount of energy related damage, which is going to mean that you'll probably blast through this very quickly. However, that's not always the option, and you may not have Morningstar, but there are other champions you could use. Yep, you could use a champion like Dr. Doom. You could use a champion that's like Void. You could use a champion that does huge amounts of debuff effects, like doing the heavy attack method with Archangel. There are so many options there. But if you don't have any options like that, or any of the best champions rated in game, then I'd largely say keep the enemy at L1 and just keep on hitting on through it, and you'll be fine. Maybe high amount of block proficiency and armor rating champions will be good to limit down that. If you're unable to do more intercepts, then I'd probably focus more on your parries and as well of withstanding damage, but making sure not pushing the enemy past their special 1 attack. Next up in this Burden of Might time, the opponent's power gained by striking or being struck by their opponent is reduced by 15% for each buff currently active on them. Additionally, each time a buff activates on them for any reason, they lose 20% of their max power. This is when I think debuff specialists come into play. A Mega Red can be a fantastic champion for this. A champion that doesn't really require any kind of buffs, but is a debuff specialist, as well as Archangel and Void. And Void's all about keeping the distance and just waiting for those debuff effects to come on. As well, you've got a champion like Mr. Fantastic, which is great as well for debuff damaging. So yeah, there's so many different options available to cause a real amount of havoc here. So yeah, champions that do debuff related effects could be really handy for this as well, because you don't want to have champions that have buffs. So do watch out as well, because dexterity may be something that may trigger when it comes to Burden of Might. But apart from that, I think with debuff effect damage champions or damage over time effect champions, you can have a lot of fun. Now when it comes to the enemy, the same thing really applies. Debuff damage is going to be important. When it comes to Electro, keep him at it as SP1, because like SP2 is difficult to evade, SP1 being the most easiest. And as well, debuff damage being key. Champions with class advantage like your Gwenpools, your Blades may be of advantage there because you're putting bleed damage into the enemy. Crossbones as well, kind of handy as well. You've got Agent Venom, but do bear in mind something, and that is strike back. So if you plant a special attack, they're going to get the same amount back. Not the greatest thing to do, because it just will put you at a big risk. So those champions do debuff effects, like your Archangels, where you do heavy, you do parry, heavy attack, and same with the Mega Red can be very handy for this. So try to limit that down. If you do think you're going to get hit, there's a champion like Bishop, which will just absorb a lot of energy-based interaction and be able to smash back a good amount of damage. Also, Dr. Doom is similar, great amount of energy resistance. So yeah, there's punishment there, but that's like shock on shock, and it's not really a thing. I'd probably say the ones I've mentioned so far would be more effective. And the final global node for 5.1.6 is Brute Force and Kinetic Instigator. Now, when it comes to this is all about making sure you're landing hits on enemies, which is really important. If you don't land a hit for 6 seconds, it is going to cause you a degen, which again, like maybe for champions that interact well with degeneration, like Hulk Ragnarok, that could be a good option for you when it comes to this. However, though, Kinetic Instigator is something to watch out for, in that the opponent generates power when striking the champion's block. So obviously watch out for that. Make sure you're not it's kind of like maybe the focus more to do parries and kind of do your intercepts, or wait for the champion to hit you whilst do a heavy attack whilst you're in a block, to then swipe back to then go back in again. And champions that are going to be quite fun against this: Old Man Logan, Sabretooth, Ghost, Dr. Doom, and yeah, just intercepting in general is important, because you're going to find a few issues down the line. And when the boss is concerned, Archangel isn't really that much of a threat. You can just do like the same thing that you would do with an Archangel against his Archangel, where you do like parry and then a heavy attack, and you'd be able to put in that, and as well poison damage down the line by him trying to hit into your block. That can work, but there's so many other champions to use against this. Try and push the champion to an L2 if you can, and then create plenty of distance. L1's a little bit more trickier to avoid if I'm honest, but the fact is you could use champions like Stark Spidey if the projectiles are coming towards you. That will build up your poise charges and you'll be able to hit on through. But most god tier champions like your Nick Furies, etc., can be helpful against this kind of situation. But do bear in mind that is a class advantage and maybe not advisable. But there's so many champions to use, and this is not as technical as it will get in 5.2. Okay, now here we are with Act 5.2, and this will be your quest to get Uncollected. This starts the kind of the big final countdown to get to 5.2.6 and take down the Collector. But let's go it through quest by quest. So starting off with this one here. Now you get Power Shield. Power Shield's the first thing, and also Role Reversal. Role Reversal is a little bit annoying. So as well, like looking at this being the class relationship on this nodes are reversed. So look, you know, it's case if you bring a tech against the cosmic, the roles are reversed. You know, that's essentially it. But again, it goes down to choice of what you choose to bring in. A lot of times people will just like plow through with different and various champions. If you match up like for like, it's not too much of an issue, and at the same time people will be able to use persistent charge based champions to damage output a huge amount, like your Aegons, like your Corvuses, etc. But also when it comes to Power Shield, that's something to bear in mind. So the attackers' basic attacks deal no damage but still generate power, and their special attacks deal 400% more. Now there's loads of champions that are quick to power gain, your Hyperions. As well, you've got your Namors, you know, decent champions like that are going to be able to completely slay the enemy. Actually, Hyperion, I think, is the top one. Also, look towards heavy attack building and also smashing in with Mordo. That's a good champion as well to use. But look, also watch out Vitality. On this line, there's so many different kind of like nodes that you'll kind of come up against and you're like, oh dear, not quite sure about this. But yeah, stuff with like Fissure to watch out for as well. And remember, a lot of the times is try and keep enemies at L1s when you're doing clearings. And also when it comes to more trickier champions like your Spider-Mans, try and absorb special attack 1 into the block or push to an L2 if possible. And also with the final boss even. And that's Vitality Rush talking about there. So Vitality Rush is whichever champion starts the fight with a greater percentage, their total health gains percentage attack bonus. More than likely it's going to be the enemy at advantage rather than you, depending on what champions you're bringing in. But let's face it, more than likely it's going to be a case you're going to be at the disadvantage. Try and keep this enemy at L1 as much as possible. But again, as we said with Power Shield, champions that build up to special attacks quicker, like Hyperion, actually like Psylocke. Psylocke's another kind of option as well. Magic, yeah, could be used for power control if you wanted to, but those are already some good options there. Same thing really applies for the next quest, like 5.2.2, because it is essentially like the same thing as the first. Look out for Bane of Damala, which is the defender deals 50% additional damage and has a 10% life steal as long as the attacker is under a beneficial effect. So the name of the game is don't have a beneficial effect, and that would be good. But the fact is it may not happen all that way, and you may look to use different champions. Debuff specialists are going to be great for this. Power control champions, yes. And when it comes to the end boss, that's the point in time you make your decisions. You've got the enemy being Hood, and Hood has more of a kind of a presence of an L1, which is the thing that you should try and watch out for. Power control champions being the best option here. Or it's a case of perm stunning, so utilizing of champions like Ronan, like Hulk. That could be a good option to sort that out if you are struggling a little bit. But L1, if you can, keep the enemy to it, because otherwise L2 is a bit more difficult to go up against. And you might find some issues with Electro, and you might find a few issues with Iceman. I would probably say when it comes to those two, having Ghost in the roster will be good, converting those debuff effects into positive Fury-based passives. That's going to be something quite good. Those are things to watch out for. Hyperion's a bit annoying with the stunt immunity, and again, I'd probably say that with this, you're going to have to make some decisions whether or not you bring a power control champion, how much you eat into your block, and how much you hit out as well. But yeah, like quick building champions that do damage, even Hyperion as well could be a good option. But as well, look towards your Dr. Dooms and nullifying against this, because he has that power gain and it's something to really watch out for. But also look out for role reversal. Any nullifying champions, usually mystics, so having something that's not mystic is kind of important. But look, keep champions to L1s as much as you can. Watch out for putting any kind of, well, let's face it, bleed effects on this champion will not be good. Debuff effects are quite good to put against him, against Cable, but look, watch out for that. Here we are in 5.2.3. Little bit frustrating in here because you've got Buffet as being the main node. And Buffet, obviously, in a nutshell, is every 7 seconds the next buff triggered on by this attacker is immediately nullified. Each time this effect triggers, the defender will regenerate 5% of their max health. It is frustrating, and there's a lot of champions to use against this, but I would probably say don't use champions with buffs as their main key source of power and damage. It's going to be debuff specialists you're going to want, and at the same time you're going to have to either try and avoid, maybe take off dexterity, because when you swipe back and you get that lovely little dexterity yellow buff in the top left hand corner, it is going to trigger Buffet. So I know that some people in the past have turned off the mastery of dexterity, which you can find in your proficiencies, and as well the fact is if you're using nullifying effects, it's not going to be very effective. And there's going to be times when you're going to really want to nullify some effects. Either way, there's a lot of champions ready to use for this. I'd probably recommend, as long as you don't do the heavy attack method, Cap Infinity War would be very good for this. I think Void would probably be one of the best, based on the fact of keeping your distance, building up those debuff effects and putting damage in. Also, look out for the likes of a Mega Red, Blade, as long as, again, you don't trigger any buffs, you'll be fine. Archangel, Magic, some very decent debuff champions that don't cast any great amount or any, in general, buff effects which would trigger off the Buffet effect. There are also some annoying customers leading up to Joe Fixit, and especially if you don't take down certain types of nodes, and obviously sometimes it would be applicable, you can't take them down, you're going to have a little bit of trouble. Stun immunity, special lock 2. Yeah, that's when things get a little bit frustrating, and this is when champions like a Mega Red and Void do actually give some decent worth to you. And on the boss, I'd recommend trying pushing towards an L2 as much as possible. Easier said than done, but special attack 2 is a lot easier to avoid than the first one, because the first one is a load of projectiles. Unless you plan to bring projectile-based champions, this isn't going to be an easy fight for you, but you'll have to eat the L1 into the block. Don't try and avoid it. It would probably waste your time if you did so. Now we're on to 5.2.4. This is Masochism. It's the opposite to Buffet, in that you're punished for putting debuffs on the enemy. And there's a few things to watch out for. There's Caltrops on this lane. That's over here. And that is annoying, but there are champions that are able to do stuff with bleed or be bleed immune champions, depending on what you've got in your roster. Also, there'll be stuff on the other side with Caltrops. There's also like other lanes that are going to be a little bit annoying. And for this, your immunities are going to be very important. I would say if you're looking for champions that would be good against a lot of the people here, Mordo is actually going to be a pretty good champion, except for going against the Caltrops line. Because what you're able to do with Mordo is that if you're like building up Fury attacks, you can do that by hitting down your heavy. Also, you're able to hit into an L3, and that's what I recommend, doing a special 3 for him. Because if you do an SP2 or an SP1, you're putting debuff effects on the enemy. You may want to put parry off and just absorb a lot of damage into your block, but that is totally up to you. But if you can remember just to stay in your block each time, and you don't want to trigger off Masochism and obviously healing the enemy, that again is your choice. There are ways to kind of interweave around that, but again, it kind of puts it to champions that would trigger off too many of the Masochism. And you can, like I have in the past, just kind of muscle through it. I've used Blade to just muscle through this and kind of just repeatedly put in damage. Cat Beardo would be a good option for this as well. You can do a heavy attack, hitting with an SP2, big damage off of that, and obviously taking down enemies is pretty easy. And when it comes to the end boss, and that is going to be Storm, again, down to choice for this. If you've taken down Caltrops, not too much of a problem. If for whatever reason that you haven't, then you're going to be trying to just weave around that SP1 a lot of the times, because SP2 is equally bad, but look, let's face it, you don't want to be getting hit by an SP2, especially into your block. So power control could be quite helpful, but at the same time, do bear in mind if you're putting anything with a power lock, again, you're triggering Masochism. So champions like your Angelas, like your Colossuses, may be a good option for this, as long as you're not putting in a debuff based effect. And now we're on to 5.2.5. Now this one is kind of fun, especially because you've got Bane. Now I've always wanted to try or kind of like play about with trying to throw off SP1 from Mr. Sinister to then swap back that effect, and that could be something that could be quite enjoyable to do with Bane, kind of switching between one and the other. Also, look out to other champions that are able to do some unblockable effects, because let's face it, every time I see Bane put on, champions seem to be a bit more defensive. So what's the best way to kind of get Bane switched over to the other enemy? Unblockable specials. And the best one I can think of is Old Man Logan. Sabretooth can have something with the synergy, but at the same time, you've also got like Ghost as well with the synergy. And just throwing back specials to the enemy is kind of a cool thing. So yeah, you might want to use Ghost, you might want to use Old Man Logan, Sabretooth, and there's so many others to mention for that unblockable specials. Especially over SP1 with Old Man Logan, I feel would be a better option for this. But look out for, again, for role reversal and the damage output in this circumstance. And as well, certain champions where it doesn't really kind of work too much. Watch out for Arc Overload and Mirror Image. Different types of lanes will kind of like have different things. You can see Arc Overload there, and you may want to use champions that heal block for this, and as well like Mirror Image as well. You may want to use applicable champions. Adaptive as well is there. Ragnarok is there, and just little tricky things that Kabam will put in place to kind of to watch out for that. As you can see, Mirror Image there. It's every 7 seconds automatically mirror all cruelty, position, resistance, fury armor, and regeneration for 6 seconds. Now, I kind of would say using Morningstar against this, but the fact is you have to guarantee that the enemy has a buff attack in order to smash back with some energy damage off the SP2. So I maybe recommend like doing a heavy attack and then getting that power gain buff, and then it's a case of like, well, the Mirror Image will then take that on board, which I don't know whether or not Morningstar will double up that, but let's face it, if the enemy has a buff, you hit in an SP2, you're able to do an amazing amount of damage. That's straight facts there. Now, when it comes to the boss, exercise caution. This is a champion that should be kept to an L1, and depending on what lane you take down, it will be one of these nodes, or many of these nodes will still be up. And obviously, you'll need to just use champions correctly and accordingly to try and make this a more doable situation. But let's face it. Power control is power control. Power control champions are quite good. Vision is one of the best champions for a good chunk of Act 5 for power controlling. Magic as well. And again, list goes on with available champions to use. But the fact is, you'll need to just keep the champion at the L1. The L2 is as well both easier to evade. Don't try and fire with any projectiles. If not, make sure you're putting into a stun-based effect like a parry. And then it's a case you'll be able to smash through with a good amount of damage. This is a pretty easy boss to go against with Netflix Daredevil. Okay, and now here's the piece de resistance of 5.2.6, becoming Uncollected. Now, the global for this is still going to be Bane, so that is something to bear in mind. But as well, this is the point in time you go against the Collector. Now, my previous experience with the Collector was several years ago. I used Vision, Age of Ultron, I used Daredevil, I also used Captain Marvel, and I really can't remember because it was such a long time ago what champion I used for this situation. But there were Vision, Age of Ultron was a 4-star, Daredevil was a 4-star, and my Captain Marvel, I want to say it was either the rank 3 or rank 4. I want to say rank 3 because I don't think Tier 2 Alpha was as in great abundance as it used to be. But the fact is, the Collector is annoying, and the best way I can always say with this champion is try and keep it to an L1 as much as possible. Try and find champions that are good in the block, but also champions that may be able to block unblockable effects. And champions like Mr. Sinister are actually pretty darn good when it comes to going up against the Pain, which is the Collector. I'll probably throw some information up about this champion over the top of this. But the fact is, it is annoying, and just keep to the L1 as much as possible. And that's the best thing I can really say with it. if you are going to struggle, and let's face it, not everybody's going to be perfect at playing the game and also perfect at taking down this guy, you may need a few units. Back in the day, basically first clear I think cost me about 1,000 units, but let's face it, a lot of you are playing on better devices and also are a lot better at this at the game when it comes to first on taking the game up. It takes a lot of time to just hone in your skills, and a lot of the stuff that we've covered in this guide hopefully kind of comes to that point. I would recommend as well for this boss the likes of Stark Spidey, any other champion that have good evading abilities at their core. Nightcrawler could be quite good for this. You know, you've got Stealth Suit Spidey. The list goes on with available champions that are quite good for this situation. Petrify may be quite good with the likes of Void and also the likes of She-Hulk and the likes of Void. So look, you've got several options there to go against this champion. Also, let's talk about the lanes, because there's a few as well around it. There's villain use, which is something to bear in mind. You know, use villains down that route. I'm sure you've got villains for this. Unblockable Finale, and that's a point of when you get to 25%, just do the intercepting. Also, champions that do debuff effects quite extensively, like your Archangels, could be of value for this situation. And then you've got Transducers debuff champs are going to be good for this. Strike Back is on here as well somewhere, and that's like a case of just do your SP1 or don't do any specials. That's really the name of the game. And yeah, that really kind of covers all the different lanes that you're going to face off against. And I'll try to make sure I've put down the or typed down the information over the top of me speaking now. Okay, with that all out of the way, let's do the tedious. And this is when things get so goddamn tedious. 5.3 is a little bit annoying.